Hello, hello, and welcome to the final reading in the Sowell Collection's Spring 2024 virtual reading series. I am Kristen Lloyd, Director of the Sowell Family Collection in Literature, Community, and the Natural World, and your host for tonight. As we get started, please turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable doing so, and mute your microphones. After Bob reads, we will open the floor to questions, and you may type them into the chat box or raise your hand, and then we'll acknowledge you and you can chat. So, The Last Man in Willapa is part of the Sowell Collection book series at Texas Tech University Press, a collaboration between the collection and the press that would not be possible without the hard work of my partners, Diane Warner, former librarian for the Sowell Collection, Kurt Caswell, TTU Honors College professor, and Travis Snyder, editor-in-chief of TTU Press. Thank you, guys. The Sowell Collection is a literary archive that holds the papers of the country's most prominent writers on the natural world, including the inimitable Robert Michael Pyle. Now, Bob probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. I first met Bob in April 2016 when he came to Lubbock for the annual Sowell Conference. He strolled in wearing what I remember as a white linen suit and Richard Attenborough hat with that flowing mane and bushy beard, and someone, I can't recall who, described him as Jerry Garcia meets Santa Claus. That was Bob's second Sowell conference, but his papers have resided here since 2012. Those papers, Bob's archive, document a long career as lepidopterist, writer, and conservationist. He has published hundreds of articles, essays, peer-reviewed papers, stories, poems, and 28, well now 29 books. His work has been honored with a John Burroughs Medal, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Pacific Northwest Booksellers Award, 3 Washington Writers Awards, and 2 National Outdoor Book Awards. Bob has also worked in conservation biology around the world, founding the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation in 1971. He is an honorary life fellow of the Royal Entomological Society and the recipient of a Distinguished Service Award from the Society of Conservation Biology. From butterflies to Bigfoot, from Grays River to Cuba to Papua New Guinea, in prose and in verse, Bob's generous and joyful spirit infuses his words with a contagious wonder and reverence for the world around us. I am so pleased to have him here tonight to launch this lovely new book, The Last Man in Willapa. Please join me in welcoming Bob Pyle.
Thank you so much, Kristen. What a lovely introduction that was. And thank you all for coming. My goodness, we have a lovely bunch of people here. And you might be amazed, as I am, at the stretch of my life that they covered. There's people here from that were high school and junior high school friends of mine. My high school ecology counselor is here. I didn't get to have him for my biology teacher, but he saved my life as the head of the ecology club. And lots of other folks. So thank you so much for coming. I want to thank also the people you thanked, Kristen, but as well, especially I want to thank at Texas Tech University Press, my editor, Travis Snyder, my publicist, John Brock, the designer of this beautiful book, Hannah Gaskamp, and say what a great honor it is to be published by Texas Tech, one of the really great university presses in the country, and to be archived at the Sowell Collection, which is an honor I could never have dreamed. I also want to thank the artist for the cover of the book, a man by the name of Neil Johansson, a friend of mine for over 50 years. Neil was director of Alaska State Parks for many years, but he's a painter now on Bainbridge Island, and I inveigled him into painting the bear for me, and it wasn't easy. Writers are used to editors, but painters are not. But we finally got the perfect bear, I think, and I hope you'll think so too. And the whole story of the making of Bob's bear for this book is told in the last poem in the book, which comes after the last poem in the book. I don't know if this is the first book of poems to have a full poem in the acknowledgments, but this one does. And that's for Neil. So thank you, Neil, my old friend, for this bear. And let the bear, the rainbow bear, welcome you to Willapa. Willapa refers to the Willapa Hills of Southwest Washington, the territory I cover in my books, Wintergreen and Skytime and Grays River. A subtle group of hills south of the Olympics, way west of the Cascades, close to the ocean and the Columbia River, bounded by the Columbia, the Willapa Bay, and a few other rivers. I'm going to begin with the first section of the book. The book's in 5 sections. I'm going to read some poems from each section. And I'll begin with the poem, the first poem in the book, which is called, the title poem, The Last Man in Willapa. Before, there were bears. Then there was Weyerhaeuser, Crown Zellerbach, and hounds. The hound hunters and timber beasts wiped out the black bears of Willapa, who had a taste for sweet cambium of Douglas fir. But when the companies sold out and the hounds were banned, the bears came back. More and more folks saw black bears in Willapa. Bird feeders went down. Rumors flew. The years went by. Everyone was seeing bears. Everyone, that is, except for him. He saw a puma. He saw bobcats. He saw otters, mink, and muskrats. He even saw that elusive rodent, the Aplodontia. But bears, he couldn't spot one for the life of him. And then one day, the hired hand ran in and said, "I met a bear, a big one out back." They found its splats of wild honeycomb and pears. Next day, the last man in Willapa to see a bear saw the bear beside his mailbox, waiting for delivery, or for him, for a change. And there's that bear. I was not stoned when I saw that bear. I don't know if Neil was stoned when he painted it. I don't know. That's his business. No, just stoned on life, that's all. Now, the first section is called Threnody, and it does have some somber notes to it, as does this one, but not without redemption, I hope. In fact, I got to say something up front. I've had a lot of things written on my books, about my books, by the people who are promoting the books. And sometimes they go over the top and you laugh a little, and they're often lovely, but I've got my favorite paragraph ever on one of my books on the slipcover of this book. And it's got a slipcover because it's a hardback when you get your copy. It's the first hardback I've had in quite a while. And somebody, I don't know if Travis wrote this or John or somebody, but somebody wrote, "Often witty and with an eye to the upside, in spite of the facts, Pyle's are poems in which every story paints a picture, grace is seldom withheld, and love is never far behind." If I were asked to write a credo for what I attempt in my poems, I couldn't do better than that. So I hope to justify just a little bit of that in this reading. So there'll be some somber notes, but I hope some grace and some redemption and joy and some chuckles. Threnody for a Fawn. Those tiny triangles of ears could have been coyotes poking up there above the center line, but no, it's a fawn, no bigger than a pup. Crows jumping up out of the way of every car that comes along, as baby buckskin melds with road and white spots run together with the red. What's the point, you want to cry, of a life so little lived as this? Last night at twilight, a doe poked her nose out of brush down the slope. Beside her, spots congealed from the shadows. A newborn fawn, another, and a third. Triplets on unsteady legs, ready for what comes next, fading back into the dusk. And while we're on the somber note, I hope there will be no further need to pull out these two next little poems. First one's called The Day After the Election, November 2016. A red oak leaf and a brown beech leaf lie across a wet sword fern frond in the late sun. A chorus frog does a hoarse solo on the hill. A flicker cries a series of sharp single notes. The sun falls, the mist rises all over the valley. These things, at least, I guess, will go on. And the day after the inauguration, January 2017. A pair of golden eyes spin and dive in a riffle below the covered bridge. Hazel catkins swell and stretch, not long till bud burst. Back home, chickadees have found the feeders, at last. Feared they weren't coming at all this year, but here they are. So if I can just put those poems to bed in this book. Girl in Yellow Towel. And this is for the girl in the yellow towel, who is the dedicatee of this book. He was frying eggs. She came out of the bathroom to show him the pepper. Turned to go and then turned back and said, "Girl in towel." And so she was, standing there glowing, hair all curly damp, wrapped in a bright yellow towel. "Girl in towel," he echoed, moved his hand from spatula to moist, warm back, pulled her closer, she in her bright yellow towel, the color of the yolks clotting in the skillet. And on the food theme, in the countryside, we have an organization called the Grange. I'm sure you've all seen Grange halls. Some of you may be members of Grange. I hope some members from my Grange, Grace River Grange number 124, might be here with us. But the Grange is also called the Patrons of Husbandry. That's the formal name. And it's one of the last of the fraternal and sororal organizations in the countryside of the U.S. And I say sororal because it's never been an all-male oriented group. It's always been feminist from the start and working person and agriculture oriented from the start. It's still there, and it's often the only place we can get something done in town, such as the town is, where we meet and have dances and movies and read poems and so on and so forth. So this is called Dinner at the Grange. A moose came to Grange tonight from Nova Scotia, shot and roasted to perfection by Farmer Phil. And mangoes rolled in coconut and chocolate, brought by Amelia from Skamakawe. Mike, the county commissioner, stir-fried leeks and zucchini and mushrooms. Darbury made her famous pizza. Sulema, her chicken pie. Chris brought his potatoes. Broccoli and pecan salad appeared, and fresh sourdough bread. It's been years since pies for polio went by the wayside, along with Jell-O, and our long-running oyster stew nights is history too, along with Norman Anderson, who made it for 50 years. But though the menu evolves with the membership, we eat well here at the Grange. The hunters and the vegans, the bakers and gardeners and fishers, the R's and the D's, long hairs and short, we patrons of husbandry break bread together and burp. You know, COVID-19 brought us some blessings. One of them was the ability to meet together like this that we never got to do before, and I value that. But of course, I can't hear you and see your faces up close, so I'll just imagine where I'm hoping that you're laughing. Laughter. I could put it as laughter. So that's it for that part. The second part of the book is called The Cuba Poems. I don't know if David Taylor is here with us today. I hope so. But David, wonderful poet and scholar at Stony Brook University, took a number of poets to Cuba a few years ago, not many years ago, to meet with a number of Cuban writers and talk about this and that, share poetry, and see some of the place and see the people, talk with people. Didn't get to go out in the national parks and see the bee, hummingbird, or the toady, or the other great birds and butterflies of Cuba, but there was a fair amount going on in natural history right in Havana, including the cars. So this one is I'm going to read a couple from the Cuba poems. On the Malecon. After the day, after a nap, after rum at sunset, I walk down to the bay, the long seawall called the Malecon, turn south toward the river. Along the Malecon, lovers caress, runners sweat, yogis stretch. Fishermen cast out, some with poles, some just spools. A boy shows me the sea perch he's just pulled in. Waves slap over coral to the seawall on my right, make the sidewalk green and slick with algae. Fumes slap the other side, sea of traffic. Pardon me, fumes slap from the other side, sea of traffic where schools of green 54 Fords and 59 Chevys, 49 Chevys tool the broad four-lane. Busking guitarreros and prostitutes troll for customers. Languid boys with cell phones, girls arm in arm in short shorts and bright skirts. A plastic bag blown up with sea breeze races me all along the Malecon to the Rio Almendares and off the Malecon. The dark neighborhoods are quiet, but for soft voices of children in the streets. Doors open, bare-chested men before TVs, women talking like soft birds in the night. In a little corner bakery, I buy a sticky bun for a peso. A black woman buying bread says, "You should stay here in Havana." And the white baker nods his agreement. "Here," she says, "there is no color." The cats of Havana are black and white. Okay, a few gingers and tabbies, a calico or two, but on the whole, black and white. Also, many are polydactyl, like Hemingway's cats in Key West. It is said the cats of Cuba disappeared into cooking pots after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when hunger hit the country hard. But now they're back. It is said that all sorts of changes are coming, now that the USA is back too. Will Yankee dollars improve lives here, or just make the rich richer? Will this invasion work where the Bay of Pigs failed? Everyone wonders what's to come. Meanwhile, the cats of Havana carry on their nightly prowl. The bats of Havana whisk past my shoulder, leaving echoes of ink and gauze. And I won't read this one, but I'll just say it was funny. It was we had an evening at the Writers Union, which was a great honor. Not many people get to go there, certainly not running dogs of American capitalism, but we were invited and we brought books and gave them, and they were polite about their receipt, if not overweening. And I was looking for someone who spoke English because my Spanish is very poor. And the one person I found was a professor of English there, and he had a remarkable resemblance to Barack Obama. And I asked him if he suffered any cases of mistaken identity when the president recently visited Cuba. Only once, he said. It was the Belgian ambassador, which I thought was funny. The third section of the book is called The Children of the Night, 21 nine-line poems. The first one came to me in a dream. I woke up from this dream, and the dream said, "The children of the night went forth." I thought, what's that supposed to mean? Ned Butterfield, you're going to remember this, Judy, from Aurora in those days. This goes back to Aurora in the days even before we knew each other. So I thought, if I'm going to find out what the children of the night goes forth means, I'm going to have to write the poem. So I did. The children of the night went forth into the soft evenings of suburbia. As soon as they could open the screen door, the dimity drew them forth, and there was no one to say no, because that's what children did in those days, in that place, where dusk and freedom wore the same clothes and had the same unspoken name. Well, that was fun, so I went on and wrote 20 more of them. I'm going to read a few of them in quick succession. Most of them pertain to my brother Tom and me, my older brother, and some to friends. The children of the night try to puncture the sky. There were afternoons those summers that hung so dark and lowering that the sky itself might as well have been lead as lightning, and the promise of rain hung like love notes in the west, never posted. And that's when they sharpened handfuls of number 3 pencils and flung them into the thick air over their heads, hoping to pierce the heavy bellies of the lowest clouds, releasing the rain that would solve everything. The children of the night fly kites. Every March there came a day when the wind was up and everyone stormed the drugstore to buy new kites. The dads donned gray sweatshirts or flannels to help the children put them together. One always chose a red and black man in the moon, the other Saturn and its rings in yellow and blue. And then the whole block came out and put their kites to the sky. Their dad let them hold the strings, hoping they wouldn't let go for once, just to watch him chase it all the way down the street. You'll all relate to this, I hope. The children of the night play hide and seek. Then came summer, and with it, dusks like velvet in their warmth and softy dark. Everyone came outside, but no dads or moms, just the kids. No sooner did they emerge into the night, their natural habitat, and meet to check in and set rules, then they dispersed to bush, shed, cranny, shadow, and hid. From there, it was only an assumption that they would ever be found. And yet somehow, knowing for sure that they'd be back again tomorrow night, they all made it home for supper. Joyce, I know you're here, and you did that too, and your neighborhood was a little west of mine, so I don't know if our hide and seek ever overlapped, but it might have. The children of the night hold Dog Day. When the family had spare ribs for dinner, they took care to leave meat on the bone and saved all the gnawed ribs in a brown shopping bag. And then they slipped out the back screen door, down the lawn, over the fence, and into the alleys. A secret network behind the houses, alternate routes for kids and other animals. Every yard with the dog, they flung the ribs over the fence, crying, "Dog Day," all through the neighborhood. And the children of the night become Catman. On certain still evenings after sunset, the children took again to the alleyways, now as the night raiders, no sack of bones in hand. They took care to move quietly, not to disturb the dogs with false hopes. Slipped around houses, through the bushes, paused with a silent nod, and then one of them would ululate shrilly into the night. And that's how they got to be Catman. The children of the night catch moths. Some came to spring lilacs after the rain in the dusk, pink-winged sphinxes with hummingbird tongues. Others clung to streetlight poles or the windowsills of stores, scarlet, black, and cheddar tigers, scads of army cutworms. But for the best specimens, dove gray tulip, pardon me. But for the best specimens, dove gray tulipi, jade green campia, they went porch light to porch light in their neighborhood. Nobody missed the moths they stole, and they were only kids, so no guns, and only once did the sheriff show up. The children of the night visit the witch. The old red house just had to have a witch. Sometimes they saw her watering the lilacs where swallowtails loitered. But that didn't fool them. So one night they dared their way onto her veranda, where millers battered the screen by the hundreds. How they jumped when the back door screeched and she appeared. "I'll take all you want of those," she said, waving at the moths. It ended with cookies and lemonade, and her name was Robina. The children of the night sell stuff. Whoever condemned child labor did not know the children of the night. Lazy as a rule, they could work their little butts off to make a nickel, dig peach cans full of dandelions, cut lawns, wash cars, but best for spawn of a salesman was selling stuff. Kool-Aid, of course, from a card table, but also door to door. White cloverine salve, burpee seeds, Christmas cards, even seashells. Jewels of the sea, they'd call. Customers saw them coming and locked their doors. The children of the night do Halloween. One always went as a tiger, the other as a leopard, or a knight in armor and a desperado, according to their reigning passions. Their mom dressed the hall lamp as a witch to scare the trickers, but mostly scared the tiger, giving him nightmares on his sugar-filled stomach. Each year, they enjoyed their one sanctioned venture deep into the night, neighbor to neighbor, claiming bags of candy as tribute from those who never bought their salve. And there's a bunch more of those if you liked Children of the Night. I'm going to move on to the next to the last section of the book now. It's called From the River. I kind of did a writer's residency. Oh, and by the way, I want to say, I surely hope that most of you will have known those kinds of nights and days in your hometowns where you had the freedom of the day and the freedom of the night, at least the dusk. And that was boys and girls at the time. Not so common anymore, but I hope it still persists in some places. So this next to the last section is called From the River. And I kind of took a writer's residency one year just on my own, writing poems up and down the tidal reach of the Columbia River. It led to a book of 44 poems with my favorite photographer, Judy Vandermaten of Cathlamet. Beautiful book called The Tidewater Reach, available from Columbia River Reader Press or any bookstore. Some of those are in this book, just a couple, and then a number of them are poems that didn't make it into that book because there were too many. Some of them are political about the river and those who would like to turn the Columbia River into a river of carbon, and how we beat back the liquefied natural gas proponents and how we beat back this other carbon pipeline and that one. But I'm not going to read those. I'm going to read a poem that was supposed to be a novel. You know, I've only published one novel. It's Magdalena Mountain. I know some of you have read it. Thank you. I hope the rest of you will. Jan Chu is right below me here, and Jan was a patron of that book and made me so happy for her when it finally came out, and she made me happy by liking it. I'm writing a sequel to it now called The Silver Satyr. But this poem I'm about to read was supposed to be a novel. It's called The Book Boat. And you know, a good poem is not quick to write. It takes a long time to write a good poem, but not as long as a novel, especially if you take 40 years and 10 drafts, the way I did with Magdalena Mountain one time. So I wrote a poem instead, but I hope the whole novel's in here as a sketch. And anybody who wants to take it and run with it, write the novel, you have my blessing. It's called The Book Boat. He bought a good old tub named Lorraine off an old salt gone to shore on Sovey Island. barely knew navigation, let alone diesel. So come spring and still afloat, he found a mate, a worse off soak, never dried out, in a tavern off Lower Burnside on Water Street. To caulk decks, pump bilge, romance the fickle engine to life. When it began to look like Lorraine might not sink, he built shelves in the hold and started buying books wherever he could. Goodwills and thrifts in the Dalles and St. Helens, library sales in Rainier and White Salmon, the remainder tables at Powell's. And then, recalling bookmobiles from his boyhood on the plains, he hung his shingle on the bridge and took the book boat on the road, on the river. And so it went up and down the tidal reach, Bonneville to Baker Bay and back again, sometimes through the locks, all the way to Lewiston, laying his wares before the boaters, the fishers, the workers, the loafers, all of them, hungry for good books, though they might not know it. He sold them cheap, gave them away, or lost my place. He sold them cheap, gave them away, or his favorite, bartered for fish, fruit, or laundry. Swapped a late Brian Doyle for a sturgeon, Middlemarch for Maryhill wine. Made enough for ground beef, beer, and diesel. Even the cat got fed, and the mate paid enough for drunken leave ashore. Lorraine became a legend, up and down the river. Marinas vied for her, gave free moorage for a night or three, until he started to wonder about the islands, the inside passage, and beyond. So he took Lorraine across the bar of the Columbia River and didn't die. Put in at La Push, where he sold all of his Pushkin to a Russian emigre, and a set of Twilight to a wannabe werewolf. And then east up the straits, Nia Bay, CQ, PA, PT, Anacortes, and points north. Last rumors came from Kodiak, but even now, the Columbia remembers, and there's always a slip open, just in case. Cottonwoods in March. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Julie. Cottonwoods in March, Willow Grove. After the dance, you drove out Willow Grove, across the bridge beyond the town, between river and backwater slough. The warm night beguiled by cottonwoods all along the bank, just breaking bud, just putting out their soft green tongues, all sticky with the brown paste of balsam, once called balm of Gilead, both of you taken by the cloying scent, far beyond sense. You knew you shouldn't park, but you did, and stroked each other's faces with the soft green spears, cheeks, eyelids, right below the greedy nostrils, lips lacerating your hearts beyond repair. A pleasure so intense, the two senses least used, smell and touch, that you could never, ever speak it as it was. Barely even kissed. But you both knew, didn't you, that the kisses would come, and you could only hope they would match the sweetness of those cottonwood strokes on Willow Grove that night. Old gold, she said. I've never read this aloud. No. This is for Sally. It was time to go. I can't read that poem. Sorry. You read it to yourselves. I can read this one. It's called I Covered the Waterfront. And the great little bookstore is called Time Enough. I Covered the Waterfront, Ilwaco, December 2018. Sometimes it seems the hopes of all mankind lie on display in a small town bookstore. Against all odds, still open on a bleak December dock, in a time when so much else is going, gone. After the reading, I spill out the back door onto the wet green waterfront, walk up and down in the dripping dusk. The slips still have boats, though the fleet is tiny now. Still, a good seafood grill, a pub, and Jesse's Fish Market at the end of the pier persist. I remember Charters by the dozen, the cafe at the end of the spit. Dupé's Hardware as a going concern. But now it's mostly a matter of the riverfront, where the Columbia brushes Baker Bay before dying or being born anew into the ocean itself. And what moves me is not what's gone, but what somehow remains. The boats, the oysters, the books, shiny in the light through the wet window. They speak to the possibility of all things, even in these times, waterfronts do. As long as little seaside towns live on, giving harbor to half-forgotten craft and vagabonds on a winter's night, I will continue to cover the waterfront, seeking something not likely to be found anywhere else. And from the last section of the book, Ceremony. I'm going to read a couple of poems and then wrap it up for questions. I was going to read the title poem for the section, Ceremony, which is for Tia. I know I can't read that either, so that's all right. I'm going to run out of time as it is. You can read it on your own. Anyway, it's kind of long. I am going to read Easter Morning on the River Cam. Joanne, if you're still with us, thank you so much. And this is for you. You pointed this out to me and you took the picture and then you painted this picture for me. If you ever are in my bathroom, you see this beautiful, beautiful painting that I've tried to capture in this poem. It's called Easter Morning on the River Cam. Midsummer common in the cool blue dawning of the hottest Easter on record in the UK. Narrow boats moored with their flower pots, and some with solar panels. English robins, wrens, chaffinches, and tits call and sing in the plane trees, willows, and limes. Then here she comes, a Cambridge lass in a single shell, sculling eastward, downstream, wearing a pale mauve jersey and pink bunny ears, and leaving behind in her delicate wake the perfect flicks from the tips of her oars, and a deep and permanent dent in every heart that saw her this Easter morning on the River Cam. Come to my bathroom, you can see Joanne Herron's wonderful watercolor rendition of that same picture. Ah, yes. In my acknowledgments, I want to include my sweetheart, Florence Sage, wonderful, wonderful poet from Astoria and the best poetry buddy a person could have. These poems wouldn't be crap without her, probably. Well, some of them might be better than crap, I don't know, but Florence, my dear, thank you. This is for you, this poem. called Breakfast with My Editor. We don't rise early. Breakfast often means noon. I cut the fruit and bread while you do the eggs, or vice versa if we're boiling. My opening gambit is likely to be a dream, yours maybe an item in the news, and then we begin in earnest. Did you mean to say so-and-so? You might ask. Not that it's a question. Or, you were waiting on her, were you? Wish I had someone waiting on me. Or, did you pick that expression up in England? Or, did they really talk like that in Colorado? But the capper, when I go on and on about something, is a jaunty, ha, you think I'm listening, from you. Breakfast with My Editor. Oh, what a lesson you are, my sweet reviser, in concision, precision, and incision. Conversation by 1,000 cuts. I suppose it will go on this way. I will be the better for it, and you the dearer. We have fun. And yeah, I think I can do 2 more and still be at our time for questions. The next to the last people don't tend to write much rhyming poetry and poetry with strict verse anymore, but it's fun to do. Someone came to our open mic, Rick's mic in Astoria, every second Tuesday, every first Tuesday, sorry. If you're in Astoria, we have a good time. And someone read a rhyme poem the other night and felt self-conscious. I said, don't, no, it's the best thing you can do to learn the old forms, practice them, learn them well, and then go free. But this poem is from the heart and kind of a heartbreaker, but it's called Stepping on Snails, and it's written in blank verse, which is a particular kind of iambic pentameter that Shakespeare wrote in a lot, not to make any comparisons. However, it does have an epigram from Shakespeare. Fool, canst tell how an oyster makes its shell? Lear, no. Fool, nor I neither, but I can tell why a snail has his house. Lear, why? Fool, why, to put's head in, not to leave his horns without a case. William Shakespeare, King Lear, 1:5. It happens sometimes in the garden at night, if I come back indoors without a light, that sickening crackle that means my foot's found some elegant home, some snail carried round. Some broken-shelled snails can be repaired, but it's not in the cards if their bodies are bared. The merciful thing would be a long-snouted beetle, or sweet-talking thrush between warble and wheedle. It's not just the wreck of that beautiful swirl, the keenest desire of my boyhood world, nor taking the luckless mollusk's life, unaware, we assume, of love and strife. What troubles me are the ones that don't die, their castles shattered in bits where they lie, and what I'd like to ask of the snails I've tread on is, what does night weigh when you meet it head on? And I'm going to finish now, though I think I may have time to read one tiny little poem to close out after the question and answers. But I want to close with this one, which is just sheer fun. And I hope that it's something that every single one of you can relate to. I don't suspect you'd be here. Stuart Wexler, the savior of the old Seattle Four, is with us. Stuart, all bows to you and thank you for your good work. I could say things about everybody who's here. Hey, Travis, cool to see your face at last. Thanks for the book, man. We got her done. All right. This is called Library of Libraries. He and I were talking about our personal libraries, how we had assembled them and cared for them and played with them and loved them, and what the hell are we going to do with them anyway? This isn't a rare thing for readers. Whether on a single shelf or in their own annex, we gather our printed goods and celebrate them with every sense. They give us so much pleasure. We feel they deserve a future beyond us altogether. But who will care? Who will read them, keep them, feed them, and smell and dust them, take them down and put them back in just the proper place? Who indeed, as I did for my parents' books and some of my grandmother's hundreds? No one, that's who, unless you're one of the lucky few with the bookworm kid. It'll be Goodwill or bulk rate with a used book dealer or pulp at worst. I guess that's why I had the dream, out of desperation. In the dream was a great big building with many rooms, a one-time school or institution or factory. Each room had a name on the door, and inside all the books that person owned, shelved just as they'd been at home. No Dewey Decimal System or Library of Congress numbers here. It was a library of libraries. And when you went inside, you would see not only all those books, but what made each book lover tick. Each room a biography and books. Lots of chairs and desks and daybeds. You could stay for the day, for the night, for a week, or forever. We could do it. There are lots of empty buildings. We just need a few grand and a truck. Thank you very much. You.
If anybody has any questions for Bob, you can raise your hand or you can type them into the chat box and I will read them.
Come on, don't make me feel that
Oh,
I've
Travis.
imparted the
Oh,
sum total
Travis.
of wisdom.
Well, I'll jump in. I will take the editorial privilege. Bob, the entirety of our correspondence, I think, has been written, and so it's so great to be here to hear these poems out loud that I've been looking at on the page for the last couple of years. My question is, where we jump around in the book. In one moment, we're on the streets of Havana, and another, we're children in the night. And I wonder how you think of this as a book, when it felt like a book, the unity and disunity of it. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when it felt like a book to you and what your sense of that is.
Oh, thank you very much, Travis. People wonder about that. Is it just a matter of having enough poems, enough decent poems, A or B poems to put a collection together? Sometimes, of course, that's the way it is. And you think, well, I got more coming, better get one out. Other times, however, there are certain bodies of work that you do separate and connected, but you didn't intend them to be a book together, and yet they seem to grow together. It happens that way with fiction too, and with essay. And in fact, it should happen that way because the great poet Patty Ann Rogers, maybe my greatest teacher as a poet, she says, if you're not surprised, who will be surprised? Robert Frost said that, various people said that. But if you're not, you're not. If you're not, they're not. So you want to surprise yourself. And one of the surprises is how material fits together, how this poem, that essay might go together. And in an essay, you might find that you go in an entirely different place from where you started. E.B. White would say, you hope you will. Then it's a real essay. Same with the poem, same with the story. And in a novel, I'm just reading David James Duncan's new masterpiece, Sun House, taking me months, 800 pages, David, really? But I'm closing in on the end and I'm really page turning. And I think, good gosh, did he get a lot of disparate stuff in this? So for me, Travis, it felt like these different bodies of work, the poems from Cuba, the poems from the kids, and these two general sections, front and back. Back a little more lighthearted, front a little more heavy, but not entirely. And then the river poems, which I hadn't been finished with in the last book. They weren't finished. I wanted more. And so they all said, hey, we get along okay. We get together. And it just occurred to me that maybe they'd make a book. And it's you, young man, who had the kindness and I will say the editorial genius to let me do that. May all poets be so lucky. And so lucky to work with a press like Texas Tech University Press, which has produced one of the most beautiful books of mine. All my books are beautiful. I'm the luckiest writer. That way I don't have an ugly book. Got a lot of beautiful books. And Neil and Travis, I think this is the prettiest of all. Doesn't
Okay.
say anything about the contents, but that's that.
Okay, Bob, we got a couple of questions in the chat.
Yes.
The first one's from Jan, and she wants to know if you're reading in Nasel on May 30th, if you'll have books, and can you sign them for her?
Yes, Jan, I will be reading at the Apollo Archive Center in Nasel. I hope my local friends, maybe the members of my old writers group will even come. They hardly ever do, but maybe they'll come. Yeah, we're going to read for the Finns and the Swedes in Nasel, and I will have books there. And we can surely sign books for you and your friends, Jan. Thanks for asking.
Okay, we have one from Frank Payne. How has your look at the outdoors as a poet changed over the years?
Frank, I'm so glad you're here, man. Good old pal from Palace and Beyond and Bend. And my outlook as did you say a writer or a poet?
As a poet.
How's my outlook as a poet changed over the years? I think it's changed almost none from the earliest poems I wrote, which were about redwoods and love and this, that, and the other. They're really, really bad poems. But my concerns were the same as they are now. The natural world, which means the world, humans and the rest of nature, how they get along, how they see one another, and how they interact and how they affect me and how I might celebrate them, respond to them, share them, and hope to bring others to an awareness of our responsibility toward them. I think those have been my concerns ever since the beginning, as well as simply trying to find a voice for that which wells up within. That's why we write poems, for that which wells up in. And we do that lots of times. It doesn't really work out as a poem, but we do it anyway. And sometimes it works out as a poem. I will say that my approach has varied over the years, partly through attention to Vladimir Nabokov and his injunction to pay unending, depthless attention to the individuating detail. And it's attention to the real physical details of the world in which I am interested. But to do any justice to them, one must pay great, great attention. Another way is that people have come more and more into my poems. The rest of natural history has not gone out, but as more and more people have become dear to me, they have come into my poems, and as more and more people trouble me. And of course, conservation's always been there in a subtle way, but politics don't make very good poetry for the most part. And then finally, I'll say that my poems have changed a lot, thanks to my acquaintance with some very, very good poets. Going on tour with the Orion Forgotten Language Society with Patty Ann Rogers and Linda Hussa and Allison Deming and others. And then my own local writers group of some splendid poets, bunch of really good poets around Astoria, and of course, Florence Sage as my poetry pal. These things have all changed me as a poet, but my outlook, not a bit.
Thank you, Bob. We have one more question from Paulette Murphy. She says, can you talk about your next book?
Sure. Which one? I got a few books in the making. One of them, Pauline, thank you so much for asking, Paulette, all the good work you do for us in Washington Butterflies.
So I was thinking about the follow-on to Magdalena Mountain, which was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
That
you
was
so
my
much.
question, really.
There's that voice of yours I love so much on first Wednesdays of the month, our butterfly meetings. Paulette, yes, that book is going to be called The Silver Satyr. It was going to be your intentions changed. Like the book boat was going to be a novel, became a poem. This book was going to be a nonfiction book. In fact, I even had a nascent contract with Houghton Mifflin. It would have been my 7th book with Houghton Mifflin. My agent loved it. My editor at Houghton Mifflin loved it. And then Houghton Mifflin went and bought Harcourt Brace, and then they went into Chapter 11. And now this grand old publishing house is extinct, and they're not publishing me or anybody else anymore. So I got the book back. And, as I started to write it as a novel, as a nonfiction book, I'd been having such fun with Magdalena Mountain. I decided I'm missing writing it. It's the most fun I've had writing. And I want to go back, I want to bring some of those characters back. They weren't finished with what they had to say or do together. And then I thought, this will make a better novel anyway. I think I might have to go to Chile next January to finish it because it takes place partly in Colorado, as Magdalena Mountain does, partly in Chile, partly at Yale. And I think I'm going to have to go to Chile to see this all silver butterfly. Magdalena was about an all black butterfly, not about it. It's about people and their relationship to this butterfly. And there's an all silver butterfly in the world called the silver satyr. And if I can, I want to go see it, of course, in life. But that I hope may be the next book published, but actually it probably won't be. There'll be another book of poetry that's coming from, sorry, Travis, I hate to, double time you, but this is coming from a Watershed Press, which is run by the Cascadia Poetics Lab in Seattle. And they're the publishers of the wonderful new Cascadia Zen anthology. And they asked me if I had a collection, and I had part of a collection. I got about half of the collection for them now. So that'll be out next year. And then the novel, and then I'm working on a little book of nonfiction new essays, I think for Oregon State University Press, called Random Travels. It might not be called that. So a few things in the works.
So you're
Thank
not keeping busy?
Enough.
Not really. Yeah.
Not enough. Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay. So I don't see any more questions in the chat or any hands raised. Give it a minute. But if Bob, if you want to read your final benediction, we'd love that.
I'd rather tell stories about most of the people in this room. Oh my gosh, some of these names. I could tell stories till the cows come home, and there aren't any cows. Wow. Better not get started. I'll read you a poem instead. I'm going to read the last poem except for Neil's poem. You get to read my poem for Neil. You get to read that when you have the book in your hand with the bear in front of you. You need to do that to read Neil's poem. Thank you again, Neil, for my bear. But this final poem in the book takes it back to my mailbox, which is depicted on the cover. And the first poem took place there. If you couldn't figure it out, I was the guy that never saw a bear in Willapa, even though I wrote about how there ought to be bears in Wintergreen. I was the one who could never see one until I did. So this final poem comes back to my mailbox and to Willapa, and I hope it conveys my love of the place where I have been fortunate to live for over 45 years now, with some time out in the UK and elsewhere. Though I spend a lot of my time in Astoria now, just over the river, with the most beautiful commute ever. If you want to read my feelings about that commute, which are quite lovely, really, you can read the poem in here called I Crossed the Columbia. I'm happy to go there, but I love this place, Swede Park in the Willapa Hills. It's been a gracious home for me, and I thank everyone who has helped me to live here, including Chris Novoselic. And thanks again, Travis and Christy and Diane and everybody at Texas Tech University Press. Thank you all for coming. And this is the kind of place that I live. I hope you live in a place you love as much. It's called This Kind of Place. By the way, after this, it's a beer. Cheers. At the end of my mail walk, the box lies bang in the wet grass. Rats. Somebody's bumped it, knocked it down. But no, the mail lady says it came away in her hands. The post rotted off, flush at the ground. Sad to see that big brown tube laid low. Bought it new and shiny. Nailed it down, sank the post in the valley, turf, that very first fall. 40 years it's rested there, keeping all that mail sound and dry, ever upright. 5-mile drive for the mail with it down, and then a big job to fix it in cold, wet rain. So when I come back with pipe and strap and sledge, I gasp to see my mailbox up again, soundly braced, with green wire and 2 green fence posts. How did it get that way? I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe never will. It's just the kind of place where such a thing can happen. Thank you, and thank you for creating the kind of space where this could happen for us today. I love you all.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you everybody for coming. Please, please, please check out Bob's book. It's beautiful and it deserves as much, I don't know, love in the world as it can get. So thank you so much, guys. Have a good night.